Well, we will get started. My name is Dr. Sophie Ladd. I am an associate professor in residence in the College of Education, and I get to do the joyful work of working alongside of my two colleagues and what I would like to say friends from Nevada Partnership from the Homeless Youth. I'm going to have them introduce themselves. Juletta, if you'd like to start, and then Melissa will go to you.
Yeah, my name is Juletta Thiessen. I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator here at Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth.
Awesome. And my name is Melissa Jacobowitz, or I also go by MJ. You can call me Melissa or MJ. And I'm the Chief of Impact Systems and Policy here at Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, or NPHY. And excited to be here with you all today.
Thank you for joining us. I so appreciate you both. One of the things that we want to invite you to do today is really think about ideas and concepts that resonate with you throughout this session. So feel free to use the Q&A at the top. If you'll look in the chat, there's a chat box, but there's also a Q&A function that we'll be using throughout the session to just get your feedback and answer questions when we get to the end. All right. So as we begin today's session, our goal is really to encourage you to reflect on and consider how we, as people of the community, can be better advocates and support our youth experiencing homelessness. And one of the things I want you to remind yourselves of is youth experiencing homelessness are young people who do not have a stable, consistent, and safe place to stay each night. And that varies. So oftentimes we think of homelessness in a stereotypical way, someone that currently lives on the street that we see out. That is not typically what youth experience. There are many definitions of what stable housing means and what unstable housing is, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So as we present today, really think about your own personal biases or stereotypes that you might have had entering this space, and think about how you can acknowledge those and then again advocate for youth experiencing homelessness. And they just touched on the fact that youth experiencing homelessness are young people who do not have a stable, consistent, and safe place to stay each night. And we'll revisit that a little bit further in our ongoing presentation. So thoughts to consider as we go about this presentation is what is our relationship? And we need to understand that relationships broadly center on safety and trust, and especially when it comes to youth experiencing homelessness. They've had a lot of instances where adults have caused mistrust for them. And so as we reflect, keep in mind relationships with our youth really focus on safety and trust. Youth intersectional identities matter. And the reason why I bring this up, and I know that my friends MJ and Juletta will touch on this later, a lot of youth that are experiencing homelessness have often been reported as part of the LGBTQ plus community. They might have experiencing various identities that conflict with the homes that they were living in. And so when we think about intersectional identities, we don't just think about race or class, but we also think about gender and how their sexual identities as well. So think broadly about that. And as educators, our work must be grounded in the communities that we serve. So when we think about youth experiencing homelessness, where are the communities that we're working in, and how can we engage in those communities to make sure that our youth feel supported? All right, now it's your turn, MJ and Juletta.
Amazing. So we're going to talk a little bit about NPHY and kind of where we come in the community and helping youth experiencing homelessness. But sometimes it's kind of hard to explain experiences from a youth perspective. So we have youth explaining their experiences in the next video.
And I would be remiss, I neglected to mention that we weren't able to get a youth advocate in this space today. Unfortunately, that just happens, and that's okay. So NPHY has done a beautiful job of sharing that through this 4-minute video, and we're going to ask some questions after we view it.
When I got to the house, it was completely empty. There was nobody there. The cars were gone. The doors were locked. That was the first night I spent the night on top of the bleachers of my high school.
A guy found me on the side of the road, and I was severely dehydrated, and I was borderline starving.
she just dropped me off at a park, and it was just like, dang, that's you my mama.
What it was like growing up, being with my stepmother, it was terrible, man. Like, she was abusive, not teaching us things. You know, she would place her problems onto us. Like, we're just scared. You feel me? That's all she put onto us was fear.
I got into a really bad fight with my mom and my stepdad. A lot of domestic violence, and when I was 17, I decided to leave. I was originally just staying outside. I was sleeping, had nowhere else to go. I had no plan. I didn't know what to do.
My mom being in the cycle and her never really getting out of it, she did some time in prison. So she had a felony on her name. We couldn't really get into housing. Sometimes shelters wouldn't accept us.
I got into an altercation with my grandma's boyfriend, and I was like, I couldn't take it anymore.
I had like $52 left. Then my friends recommended that I go to the welfare office and see what I can get for benefits and see if they can help me find housing or whatever. I went and they told me they couldn't do nothing because I was 18, but they handed me a piece of paper and it said NPHY on it. I called NPHY, and it's my first time speaking to Miss Nikki, and I was like, I'm homeless, I have nowhere else to go, and I just didn't know what to do. And she was just like, yeah, you can come to the address on the paper and just come do an intake and we can help you whatever you need.
I didn't know that there was like a second chance at all. When I was growing up, I was always told like, once you're 18, there's no help, you know, like you're an adult.
When I first came in, the first person that I got the pleasure of meeting was Miss Nikki, and she made everything A-okay.
My first thoughts were, this is gonna be a new beginning. It's gonna be a new future.
I would say the best part of being a part of NPHY was the feeling of community. I liked feeling connected with those around me who are able to like relate to my current situation. Those who aren't gonna judge or hold some sort of stigma or expectation because you are homeless.
If I could go back, something I would tell myself is just, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna make it out of this, but keep your head down, keep going. This isn't the end of the line.
I moved into housing and it's been the best experience. Staying in their shelter felt accepting and loving, and it felt like a family. It didn't feel like I was going home to a shelter. It felt like I was going home to a group of friends.
I stuck around because it helped me get a clear understanding of myself. Having that support team with NPHY, it was people that support you here, people that listen, things that I wasn't used to, like with my family.
Something that they helped me accomplish is passing my GD. And when I passed it, I felt like a new person, to be honest. I feel like a new person.
My life has changed drastically, and more responsible, more understanding, and just not acting without thinking. I appreciate NPHY for taking the time to mold me into the person that I am today.
I would like to thank NPHY for absolutely everything. I'm very happy with the outcome of what I decided to do when I met NPHY.
Thank you. Like, I mean that from the bottom of my soul.
The people in here is like the family I never had. This is really the actual family I needed.
Something I would tell a young person coming to NPHY is, congratulations. You know, this is the first step to the rest of your life. If you really truly want to make a difference and change your life for the better, this is the place to do it.
Thanks for sharing that video, NPHY team. So what we want to do now is just take a moment to consider what stood out to you from what the youth shared, from their stories, what stayed with you. As educators, students, human service providers, and community members, what does advocacy for youth experiencing homeless look like in your role? And you don't have to answer that just yet. What does it mean to be a supportive, trusted adult in a young person's life? In what way can you ensure youth feel cared for, safe, and valued in your space? So just go ahead. We're just going to take 2 minutes. That's why I invited you to get a piece of paper, or even in the chat, share your thoughts about what you noticed from that video. What are some things that resonated with you? Oh, it can happen out of nowhere, indeed. Thanks for sharing, Jen. The ways the system does not help, but just creates barriers. The resilience in these individuals, yes, indeed. One never knows what a teenager or a child is really going through. Thank you for sharing, Yvonne and Shantia. Appreciate that. I enjoyed the video. These kids had no control over their life. They didn't. They hit rock bottom before they knew. But they made a decision and found a family and a community, yes. They all wanted a space to belong, someone who believed in them. Seems as though they went to a place they thought they would find help, but they were turned away. Support came from places they had not expected, yes. Sylvia said, whatever you need. Going from a sense of being disposable to a place of belonging, absolutely. And as educators, I like to think of us as frontline workers, right? We see these kids every day if they come to school, and we can provide that space of belonging in our roles, in our myriad of roles as educators. So I'm going to move on, but let's keep those questions in mind. If you didn't get the chance to jot down some responses, just keep those in mind as we progress throughout our presentation. My perception of why students become homelessness has been broadened. Oh, I love that. And hopefully it'll continue as we move on throughout. Let me move to the next slide and just keep sharing in the chat. You guys can collaborate with each other as well. All right, you guys are up.
Awesome. So we're going to share a lot of information about like statistics around youth homelessness, especially here in Southern Nevada, and some things to look out for being an educator in CCSD and working with youth. But before we do, I want to tell you a little bit more about Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth and kind of what we do here in the community. Amazing. So Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth, or NPHY, we are the most comprehensive service provider for the thousands of youth experiencing homelessness in Southern Nevada. Through a variety of programs, we provide access to life-saving services for homeless youth 24 hours a day at virtually every street corner in Southern Nevada. We have places where youth can access us 24/7 through our Safe Place program and crisis intervention, so youth always have access to our programs. And NPHY's carefully crafted grouping of programs empowers young people to build the future they want for themselves. A big part of what NPHY does is encouraging youth and empowering youth to build the future they want and encouraging them to be self-sufficient, productive members of society. Go to the next one. So now this is where we get to talk about all the statistics and fun stuff and information about youth experiencing homelessness in Nevada.
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you so much for teeing that up. So, a lot of people might not realize the extent of youth homelessness in Nevada, that this is actually a staggering issue. And there are thousands of young people experiencing homelessness in our community. And so for many, many years, we haven't really known the true extent of this issue. And so the state of Nevada, recognizing that, actually embarked on a 2-year-long exploratory study to try to understand how many young people are actually experiencing homelessness in Nevada. Who are they? Why are they experiencing homelessness? And what can we begin to think about doing in order to solve this pressing issue throughout our state? And so after that 2 years of work with a mixed method study where they did all different kinds of work, from focus groups and surveys to interviews to all different ways of looking at data throughout the state, what that study ended up finding was that, it is still very difficult to tell how many young people are experiencing homelessness in Nevada, but that we now have this very large range to keep in mind. And so what the study did find is that we know that over the course of 1 year, 2023, we know that there were 2,868 young people who are unaccompanied, so experiencing homelessness on their own, separated from their families, from their parents, etc., ages 12 through 24 throughout our state, who actually accessed homelessness services. Right. So these are young people who are actually identifying their situation, going to get help like the young people in the video and accessing that help. And then service providers are actually keeping that information. So actual young people accessing services, unduplicated individual youth, we know there were almost 3,000 young people actually accessing services in an average year here in our state. However, we also know that that means that is a significant undercount, right? We know that not every young person is in a place to access services. Not every young person knows how to access services. Not every young person is at a place where they're comfortable or confident to access services. There's so many young people we know that are falling through the cracks that are not included in this number, right? And so therefore, what this study did was looked at national estimates, right? And looked at, there were some national studies done on youth homelessness where there were all kinds of things done to try to figure out what is the true number of youth experiencing homelessness nationwide. And they took that national information and applied it to Nevada demographic data. And when they applied that national estimate to our statewide situation, they found that we could have as many as over 33,000 young people experiencing homelessness across the state of Nevada, right? So this is a major, major issue. It's not just a few young people, it's many, many young people, possibly over 30,000 young people statewide who are experiencing this. And that includes over 8,000 minors and over 25,000 young adults in our community. So this is a major, major issue that we all need to band around to try to figure out how to solve, and young people that we need to serve in our classrooms. Next slide. Thank you. So talking about here locally, right? So in our Clark County School District in 2024-2025 school year, there were over 13,000 students identified as experiencing homelessness, right? So here in our own backyard, in our own school district, we know that this is a major, major problem, right? And these are only young people who are identified, right? So we can anticipate that there are many more young people as well. And of course, we also have young people who are in colleges and universities or technical schools or disconnected from schools as well, not included in this count.
So youth experiencing homelessness, they are often referred to as an invisible population, and this is because youth or people view homelessness through a very adult lens, and that's just not generally how youth experiencing homelessness presents. Youth will do everything in their power to hide what they're going through. They will crash with their friends, they will shower at school, they're dressing like their peers. You can't look at any youth in the community, on the street, in a classroom, and with any sense of certainty say that that youth is experiencing homelessness. And because of this, people don't see the problem. It's not out right in front of you, so they think it's not as big of an issue as it is. But clearly the numbers show that youth experiencing homelessness, especially here in Southern Nevada, is a wide-ranging issue.
Absolutely. So who is experiencing homelessness, right? And what do we mean when we say a young person experiencing homelessness? Like Dr. Ladd referred to earlier, this definition of homelessness, it might be broader than what we typically think of when we think of what a person experiencing homelessness is going through, right? And so throughout the country, there are a variety of different definitions of who is a young person experiencing homelessness, right? And there are 3 different federal agencies at the U.S. government federal level that define homelessness and define youth homelessness. And these 3 agencies all fund many different programs that serve young people. And when they all have differing definitions, that obviously can create some complications, both for providers and for the young people themselves, because young people can qualify for different programs based on whether they fit under different conflicting definitions. But so to talk about these different definitions and who's included in them, so McKinney-Vento, which may be the definition that's most relevant to many of you on this webinar today, that's what the U.S. Department of Education uses. That's what our school districts use. And this is a very broad definition of homelessness. And this is any students who lack a regular, adequate, and fixed nighttime residence, right? So definitely that includes people living in places not meant for human habitation, on the streets, in cars, places like that, staying in temporary emergency shelters through homelessness providers, etc. But it also includes young people, students who are experiencing couch surfing, for example. Like maybe they have a temporary place they can stay with friend. They're hopping from friend's couch to friend's house, but all it takes is friend's mom one time to say, you know what, you've stayed here for a couple weeks. Unfortunately, we can't keep you here any longer. And then that young person has nowhere to go and is out on the streets, right? That also includes families who are doubled up. So if they're a young person and their family don't have somewhere to stay, but they stay with extended relatives and they're sleeping in the living room or something like that, it's not a stable, fixed, regular regular, adequate place, they're also included in this definition. It also includes people who are staying in daily, weekly motels, right? You might have somewhere temporarily to stay where you have enough funds to stay for 1 week, but you're not sure how you're going to continue that or where you're going to go after that. So anywhere that is not regular, adequate, and fixed, according to the McKinney-Vento law, which the U.S. Department of Education uses, those students are considered as experiencing homelessness. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development has a different definition, a much more restrictive definition, where they look at people who are literally homeless, as they call it, living on the streets in places not meant for human habitation, etc. They also consider those who are at imminent risk of homelessness, which means that within 14 days, if they have some sort of a temporary housing, couch surfing, etc., that if within 14 days they will lose that and be literally homeless on the streets, they're considered homeless according to HUD, or fleeing domestic violence with nowhere else to go, also considered homeless by HUD. And then the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, they fund a lot of youth-specific homelessness programs. They also have a broad definition: youth for whom it is not possible to live in a safe environment with a relative and who have no other safe alternative living arrangement. So again, when we talk about homelessness, we include young people who do not have stable housing. They don't have somewhere they can rely on, that they can count on, and that is what we want to make sure that we're meeting those needs around.
Can you quickly touch on the statistics of youth, what youth experience if they were to be on the street within 24 hours?
Yeah,
I know that's a really important piece of information that educators don't often know about.
Definitely. So being a young person on the streets is extremely dangerous, right? As we all may imagine. And one statistic in particular shows that nationwide, 1 in 3 young people experiencing homelessness will become victims of sex trafficking within 48 hours of moving onto the streets, right? So it's extremely dangerous, right? Young people experiencing homelessness, they're less likely to graduate high school. They're less likely to go on to college, right? They're more likely to experience unwanted pregnancies. They're more likely to experience substance abuse, more likely to be victims of crimes, more likely to be incarcerated. There's so many extreme dangers, gang involvement, mental health. Like, there's so many dangers of a young person being out on the streets. And that's also part of, as Joletta mentioned, why young people tend to hide their homeless status, right? Because it is very dangerous to be a young person exposed in that situation. But a lot of times young people, they don't know how to access services. They don't know if there are services available. They don't know who to turn to. And therefore they end up in predatory situations where people see them as somebody that they can say, hey, you have nowhere to stay, trade your body and we'll be able to give you a place to stay tonight, right? So it's very, very dangerous for young people.
Can you also touch on like the rural side? Because I know we have people from outside of Las Vegas.
Absolutely.
I know we've talked about this at the summit, but like tribal areas, rural areas where we would not expect also have some challenges around that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that nationwide study on youth homelessness that I mentioned earlier, that we took the national data and applied it to our local demographics to come up with that 33,000 number, that same study also looked at, so this study again was nationwide, and they looked at rural areas, urban areas, suburban areas, etc. And they found throughout the country that the likelihood of a young person experiencing homelessness per capita was equal in rural communities and urban communities. And that was a surprise to a lot of people, right? A lot of people thought, wow, it's got to be an urban problem, right? And, and all of that. But that's actually not the case. That when we look at the proportions of the populations in those communities, youth are just as likely to experience homelessness in rural areas throughout the country. And here in Nevada, there are specific barriers that rural communities face, right? One is that there are very few resources, right, in rural communities. We actually don't know of any youth-specific beds in any rural communities in Nevada. So they may have some homelessness beds, but they do not have beds that minors can access. And then for our younger adults, ages 18 to 24, they're competing with the older adults for the beds, and they don't have any specialized services for the young people, which young people definitely benefit from specialized and tailored services. So it's very difficult in the rural communities to find services for young people.
Thanks, MJ. Let's move on. This is the hopeful part, right? About the legislation.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and just to mention as an aside, we also mentioned kind of intersectional identities and all of that, and just to mention that too. You might be wondering, why are young people experiencing homelessness at such high rates? What's going into that, right? And there's so many different factors at play. Of course, there are socioeconomic factors. Nevada actually has the least number of affordable and available rental units per the number of extremely low income renters that we have in our community. And in in the state, there's actually, for every unit that is affordable and available, there are 13 extremely low income renters who need that unit. So it's an extreme crisis in our community in Nevada here. But there's so many different factors, right? There's young people falling through the cracks of child welfare. There's abuse and neglect. There's, all different youth coming out of the closet, like Dr. Ladd referred to earlier. There's, race also plays a factor. We know that BIPOC youth are much more likely than their peers to experience homelessness. There's immigration struggles. There's all different kinds of things that lead to young people experiencing homelessness. But however, yes, in the hopeful side of things, there are a lot of organizations like NPHY and many of our partner agencies, including UNLV as a major partner, that are partnering around this issue and finding ways to not just serve young people when they need the services, but address the root causes of this issue, right? And something that NPHY did is back in 2017, we launched something called the Movement to End Youth Homelessness in Nevada to really try to address this from a systems level, right? So we knew that serving individual youth is extremely important, but that we weren't going to really move the needle and solve this issue if we didn't address the root causes of why youth become homeless and why they stay homeless. And so accordingly, we've really done a lot of work to address youth homelessness from the systems level. And one aspect of that, of course, is policy advocacy. So we have worked together with young people and many others to get some state laws passed over the course of the past several years. The first law that we were able to get passed, which was a bill AB 363, and through this, we were actually able to break down barriers for young people to access identification documents. So this enabled young people experiencing homelessness to be able to get driver's licenses and state IDs without fees. And for the very first time, we're able to take away, they're allowed to get original or duplicate. Actually, we're able to take away the fees for their driver's test, etc. So be able to get those items for birth certificates as well. And we also tried to simplify the process so that actually advocates in schools could apply for birth certificates or evidence of birth for the youth as well. So really trying to break down some barriers, break down fees, etc. Then we got a bill passed that is now a law, that the bill was AB 197, and that enabled unaccompanied minors to access healthcare services. So this is extremely important. We actually got this passed during the height of the pandemic, and so it had an immediate effect. It was very, very useful and very important and needed, and our case managers and our youth came to us and said, hey, this is a problem. The unaccompanied minors who are separated from their families, who are kicked out of the house or, abandoned by their parents, and they can't access them, providers won't serve them, and so there used to be a 4-month wait period. They had to experience homelessness for 4 months before they could be considered for services. There was no good way to prove that so that the providers could feel comfortable with liability. And it was, in the past, only physicians were able to serve the youth. So what we did was we got rid of the 4-month waiting period. We made a very clear and simple process to document a youth's homelessness and unaccompanied status so that providers felt comfortable to serve. And we expanded it from physicians to all healthcare professionals. So that added in, on the medical side, it added in PAs and nurse practitioners and all other types of people who are serving youth. But then it also added in behavioral health and mental health and even dental and vision and all of these things that were not allowed before, right? So this was a major issue, right? Young people couldn't access even things like asthma medication, diabetes medication, couldn't even get glasses, et cetera, et cetera. So even also COVID vaccinations or things like that. So we were able to get this law passed, and this law has now been active for a number of years and has really broken down significant barriers for unaccompanied minors separated from their families because of homelessness to be able to access vital health care. And then for the last 2 sessions, we've been working on a higher education bill. So we still are in the process of trying to get this passed. We've worked on it for 2 sessions, as I mentioned. Last session, we actually did get unanimous support in the Nevada Assembly and Senate, but unfortunately the bill was vetoed by the governor. And it had to do with other things that were in the bill that actually didn't have to do with homeless students. So it was kind of a victim of something else. But however, what we've been working on doing is that here in Nevada, I don't know if everybody on this call knows, but foster youth, young people who have been in the foster care system in Nevada, have a waiver for tuition and mandatory fees. So students who were in foster care at age 13 or older in the Nevada system are actually able to get basically free college here in the public higher education system through NPHY, which is absolutely fantastic and amazing. And so we've been advocating for students who have experienced homelessness, that really kind of sister population, to be able to get those same benefits. So we've been working very hard to get tuition and mandatory fees waived for students who have experienced homelessness. And we got very close in the last session, and we are not giving up on this fight until this passes. And so we will continue to pursue this in the next session and look forward to being able to break down this major barrier for our young people who have experienced homelessness homelessness to, obtain higher education and pursue their dreams and become the people that they want to be.
Thanks for sharing that. I don't think that many people understand how important the identification documents are, because if you don't have permanent or stable housing, if they're 15 and 16 and they want to work at, like, let's say it and get a food handler's card, but they don't have a permanent address, they can't get an ID. So being able to pass that legislation was crucial. The other piece that I know we've talked about too is NPHY is the only, correct me if I'm wrong on this, is the only facility that can house youth under the age of 18, right? Without parent consent. Am I right about that?
Yes.
About it.
Yeah. So NPHY was actually founded as a community coalition who actually got a law passed in the first place. So I didn't include that one in here, but that was all the way back in the year 2000. NPHY was actually created because a lot of concerned community members noticed that displaced youth, young people experiencing homelessness, it was becoming a major problem, and youth were not able to access services because parental consent was an issue, right? They couldn't even get food or shelter or any sort of survival services. So NPHY originally got a law passed that in Nevada we call the Right to Shelter Law, and that enabled basically, so if an unaccompanied minor, they're separated from their family, they're experiencing homelessness, and a licensed professional such as a social worker or others is able to substantiate that they've experienced abuse or neglect, then that young person can consent to life-saving survival services on their own. So things like food, hygiene items, shelter, etc. So we were able to get that law passed. And then that law also includes basically a process where certain youth shelters are given their rights by their counties to be able to be the person that serves that law or the organization that serves for that law. So NPHY is the designated right to shelter agency for Clark County. So we are the only agency locally that serves unaccompanied minors without parental consent.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
All right, Juletta, I think it's your turn.
I think I'm taking on this slide as well. But yeah, so, and also just to mention, we work very closely with Child Protective Services and Department of Family Services. And of course, we also do look, is it a situation where we can reunify youth with family members safely, whether it's a parent or where they came from or whether it's another relative. So just want to be clear that we definitely do look at that family situation and help, and of course work with CPS, etc. So tips and tricks for working with students experiencing homelessness. So we mentioned, right, there's over 13,000 students who have been identified as experiencing homelessness. There are students experiencing homelessness in every school in Clark County, right? This is a widespread problem, whether it's in wealthier neighborhoods or poorer neighborhoods, whether it's all throughout our community, right? So it's very, very possible that any of us in this room could be working with students experiencing homelessness without even necessarily knowing if we are, right? A lot of young people, as Gillette shared, don't want to share their situation, they may not even consider themselves, taught several, absolutely. They may not even consider themselves homeless. They might just say, I'm just in this situation right now, hopping from place to place, but they may not call themselves homeless or see themselves that way, or they may not feel comfortable sharing with even their closest friends, let alone teachers and others. So here are some things that we can do when you have a classroom environment where there may be young people experiencing homelessness in that classroom. So creating a safe space, right? So creating a safe environment when engaging in conversation, knowing you don't know the full backstory of what may be going on with the young people in that room. Sincerity too. If a young person does share something about their life, share something about their living situation with you or something like that, make sure that you are sincere and mindful in each interaction, but respect their boundaries, right? And don't force it. They may be ready to share one thing on one day and something else a week later and something else a month later. So just be mindful of that. Also, show your interest, right? Lead with curiosity and care and refrain from assumptions or bias regarding their situation, right? So we may not know the full story. It may take a long time to learn different aspects of the story. So again, just leading with curiosity and care and open-mindedness and knowing that you may not know the full background, and giving the youth time to share. Accepting them, asking open-ended questions to better support the youth and identify their needs, right? Asking things like, oh, is that something you might need help with? Would you be interested in learning more about this resource? Like, is that, something that's creating a situation for you that's affecting how you're able to do your homework? Different ways that you can is there a situation where you might need some help with food? Like asking different open-ended questions and kind of learning and understanding over time. Flexibility. A lot of young people, like we mentioned, yes, and definitely most educators will experience working with students who experience homelessness. Absolutely. And, allowing for flexibility in assignments and requirements, right? Because there may be young people who don't have access to technology. There may be young people who don't have a quiet space, right? They're couch surfing in a living room and there's a bunch of cousins or little kids around and all kinds of stuff. They may be helping with childcare themselves, right? They may be responsible for childcare in their family, whether it's their own child or whether it's step siblings, siblings, etc., cousins, anybody. There's so many different situations. They may have multiple jobs in addition to school, etc., etc. So knowing every youth situation is different and allowing for some level of flexibility in assignments and requirements. Support working with individual students to address complications or needs that arise, right? A young person may come to you and say, hey, I can't do this particular assignment in this way. I don't have a fee to be able to bring for this field trip. I don't have, I can't get my parents' permission because I'm not staying in a place where I can get my parents' signature on something. Like different types of situations, and being able to be flexible and supporting and working to figure out those individual needs and how we can address those complications. Destigmatizing, right? Breaking down stereotypes about homelessness in your classroom, right? A lot of people have a lot of stereotypes, right? The young people that were in that video, they probably didn't look like a lot of the stereotypes that many people have when they imagine what a person experiencing homelessness looked like, right? Young people, they look like any other young person, right? And so getting ahead of that and breaking down stereotypes about homelessness in your classroom before you may even know if anyone in your classroom may be experiencing homelessness, having open conversations about that, breaking down those stereotypes and not playing into stereotypes as well. And then discretion, approach each situation with sensitivity. The overwhelming majority of the youth that we serve, especially in a classroom or school environment, they want to blend in, right? They don't want to stand out. They want to be seen as any other youth, right? Regardless of the difficult situation that they're going through. So, of course, considering confidentiality, discretion, not putting their situation on blast in front of others, not having a conversation where others can hear, not having something open on your computer that others can see about the youth situation, etc., etc. So being careful in using that discretion. And we have a couple QR codes here as well. We have a lot more information of this type. We have a website specifically for educators that we've developed that has resources like posters, and we have a poster version of this tip sheet, etc., etc. So if you could scan this QR code, you can check out our website. And then we also have a training video specifically for educators and CCSD staff that goes over a variety of information about youth homelessness, even more in depth than some of the stuff that we've just said. So if you're interested in watching that video, if you could scan that QR code and do that as well. So, but yeah, that's a little bit of information. I see some questions in the chat, but we'll save those for questions at the end.
Thanks, MJ. As we're thinking about our students, recognizing signs of homelessness can help support students before they fall through the cracks. And this specifically speaks to us as educators. What may seem like behavioral issues or disengagement often stems from trauma or instability, not defiance. And I think that's really important. As educators, we often think if a child doesn't sit still, if they're being dismissive, they're disconnected, they're tired, they're sleeping in our classrooms, especially when we get to those high school, middle school ages, that they're just not being polite, they're not participating appropriately, they're being defiant. But that often is not the case with especially youth experiencing homelessness. So some of the things we want to think about are what are some of those common red flags, and NPHY has done a beautiful job of thinking about this and representing this in tangible ways for us as educators. If you see students that are saying after school, after closing time, like the one that was mentioned in the video, sleeping on the bleachers in a high school, that could be a red flag. And again, not all of these necessarily mean that a youth is experiencing homelessness, but they also might be experiencing trauma. And one thing I love about NPHY too is that they're not only for youth that are experiencing homelessness, but those safe places are for any youth experiencing trauma as well. So other things are they might be avoiding questions about their address, or they might respond with anger and embarrassment with what MJ touched on earlier. They might have inconsistent grooming or wearing the same clothes several days. They might frequently change living situations, like we mentioned earlier, couch surfing, living at a friend's house. Those are all really important things to notice. Inability to pay fees, which MJ also mentioned, or hesitant to turn on their camera back in the COVID days, right? What are people going to see in the background? So just some things to look for and notice. And then these are some questions from the university side as educators we really want you to think about. So as you reflect on the youth that you serve in your practices, can you consider these questions? Are your youth, or you can use that as students, basic needs being met? You notice they come hungry all the time. When they leave over the weekend, they're really concerned about access to eating, wearing clothes, things like that, shoes. So are their basic needs being met? Do you as an educator provide a safe and caring environment that respects both their interests and recognizes their personal boundaries? One thing that I've learned throughout my work with NPHY is that I'm a hugger. If a youth is experienced, Julieta's laughing, is I'm a hugger, I'm a feeler, but youth that have experienced trauma often have very personal boundaries related to bodies, right? Or even smells or situations. Like, we want to be cognizant of their personal boundaries, understanding those. And then I touched on this earlier, but have you engaged with the broader community to understand both the affordances and the complexities of the spaces that you're serving? Because as both MJ and Julieta have mentioned, it's not always what we think, that just because we're in a wealthy socioeconomic situation doesn't mean that students might not and youth might not experience homelessness. Do you understand, and this is really important, because you as a teacher might be, or educator or human service person, might be the only person that youth will share their intersectional identities with. And so especially when it comes to issues of LGBTQ, right? They might not have a safe space. And as teachers, yes, we want to understand who they are as academics, but we also want to understand their intersectional identities. Additionally, you want to think about, how do your in-class and your homework assignments serve the students you're working with? Do you consider, and MJ touched on this earlier too, but this is really important, we as educators think that our content is the end-all be-all. But say I send a student home and they're experiencing homelessness, they're couch surfing, they don't have Wi-Fi, they weren't able to bring the book home. We are then putting them in a situation where not only they can't be successful in their academic position, but now they're having to be in a space where maybe they are reprimanded or punished for not being able to do their academic work, that inadvertently is caused by us as educators not knowing what they have access to. This is really important to me as a literacy scholar. Do students see themselves represented in the materials you provide? Lots of our books don't represent those intersectional identities of students. And there is so much literature being published these days where students can see themselves in that. So think about that. And how do you typically respond when students don't complete their assignments? Do you seek to understand first, or do you seek to penalize? Were they absent because they didn't have a stable place to live? Are they showing in signs of disengagement or disconnection? These are all ways that we as educators can really support our students in the space that they're in very simple but tangible ways. So also in the district, separate from NPHY, in each of your schools, or you have access to a Title I Hope advocate. And although I'm not a Title I Hope provider, I'm a university professor, Title I Hope is aligned with those McKinney-Vento laws, and they're funded through that. They have student services through CCSD and Title I Hope to help with immediate enrollment. As you know, free school lunch and breakfast is provided, backpacks and supplies, toiletry, and transportation. They can also provide emergency clothing. And then the other piece that I want to point on too is that parents do have to advocate for these supplies and these resources. So that can be challenging at times for students. So you want to make sure that you as a teacher also advocate for that support if you know that students are experiencing these challenges. So there's a QR code down at the bottom as well for you to scan related to Title I Hope. we are at the end of our presentation, but all of us have resources available. Myself, I'm Dr. Ladd Loves Literacy on Instagram. NPHY also, if you're a person that would like to get involved and learn more, they have an Instagram as well that provides opportunities for you to engage and better understand the services that they provide through volunteer and action oriented. The way that I see our work as educators too is that we're advocates and that we can also be agents of change when it comes to youth homelessness. The more that we know and the more that we understand from this side, the better we can be in helping those Justins and those Narayas that we see become successful individuals in our society. So now is the time that we will open it up to questions. I saw one question in the chat earlier, and this one, let's see. Let's find, how can we execute some of these tips and tricks when we're working with nonverbal autism students? That's a challenging one, right? And I think one of the first resources that you might want to look towards, and I think it's Bryn Reese, right? One of my fellows, is you want to look towards those Title I Hope advocates, right? How can we look to them to be supporters of that? How can we look to also some of our special ed services that are offered? How can we look to those that are offered directly in our school? So Bryn Reese, I think that's a good starting point. Stephanie, our credentials. So I'm Dr. Ladd. I'm an associate professor in residence in the College of Education at UNLV, and MJ and Melissa and Julietta can share their credentials.
Yeah, sure. So Julietta and I both work for Nevada Partnership for Homeless Youth. So that's our local nonprofit that we've been kind of talking about. That's a comprehensive service provider for young people experiencing homelessness.
And I think we partnered today, especially because what you don't know about MJ is the data guru of this world. She knows everything and anything that could be related to homelessness, not only in our state, but throughout the country. She's an advocate, and both she and they and Julietta serve throughout the country and go into spaces where, like through the movement and through other summit type events, that they are able to then advocate in those ways through the data. And data speaks, right? If we understand the situation and the numbers, we can get those supports through legislation and things like that. And Julietta goes directly out into the community and serves through events called Feel Good Friday and Thriving Thursday, so that youth that might not identify themselves as homelessness will be able to then know that there's advocates out there in the community for them. Other questions that you might have, you can raise your hand or you can put it in the Q&A or in the chat. We have about 6 more minutes. Oh, Sylvia Togano. Yes. What are some key points aspiring administrators need to know and do when they are assigned to schools? What would you say to school administrators?
I think that's a great question. That's an excellent question. And I think one, acknowledging that this is an issue, right? That there are likely to be students experiencing homelessness in your school. I think that working with Title I Hope and or us at NPHY to do trainings for your staff is, if you could be an advocate for that and make that happen, that's super important, because so many teachers, or even we did the QR code for that video, even like sending out the video to all of your staff and teachers. And, because like Dr. Ladd mentioned about being frontline workers, every person working in a school, even, the janitorial staff, the sports, everybody, they are encountering young people, and they could be the person that finds the young person on the bleachers. They could be the person that the young person is comfortable enough to open up to, etc. So really, I think educating your staff and letting people know. And I think also like working with community organizations like NPHY and others, knowing who to call if you are in that situation, knowing you can call Title I Hope, but also knowing that, if a young person is in a situation where they need somewhere to stay that night, they literally need a shelter, you can call NPHY, or there's other organizations that you can call, knowing that who are those community resources. So I'd say getting to know more community resources, making sure that you understand this issue, and training, making sure your staff is incorporating into professional development, etc. On the issue, those are great places to start.
And I've been thinking a lot about this too, Sylvia, is that in teacher education programs and human services programs, providing moments like this where scholarship and practice can directly address and share some of the numbers and some of just quick, tangible ways that education people broadly can really think about who we're serving within our schools and ask ourselves those important questions. Being able to access that through professional development is really important. When working with young students who are not always aware of their situation, what is the best way to support them without killing their perspective of their situation? These are really powerful questions. I think it goes back to Bryn Reese is, if you're aware of their situation, how can you make them feel seen and safe within your classroom, especially with young learners, right, with elementary school students? When we think about them experiencing homelessness, it's not because of any of their choice, right? And acknowledging and saying to them, like, this isn't a product of what you have done. This isn't something that you can prevent, because young people often feel responsible for that when truly it's not their fault. So, and feel free to chime in, MJ and Juletta, but I know my first response is that destigmatizing, it goes back to that destigmatizing of, this is a situation for you, but it doesn't define you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think also, we haven't touched too much about the fact that there are young people who are experiencing homelessness with their families, right? And then there are young people who are separated from their families and experiencing homelessness unaccompanied on their own, right? And so those responses can also be different. And when it comes to elementary school, it's most likely that they're experiencing homelessness with their family, right? So it's a little bit of a different situation. And there's, also family agencies and family supports that are in addition to the youth supports in our community. But yeah, I think definitely like keeping that open-mindedness and that breaking down those stereotypes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, you're welcome. We're all highly invested in this. There used to be a PD available for CCSD teachers on homeless youth self-paced. I'm sure you can check LMS for that. Yes, there is. And that actually, through Title I Hope, that QR code that we shared earlier, there's educator resources for those. But I also think it's important to engage in things like today to really understand perspectives from the human side of it and be able to talk through those things, right? And ask questions. I wish that one of our youth would have been here today. I've had the pleasure of working alongside of them. When you hear from them directly, you just realize that as adults, we have a real opportunity to make them trust and understand that there are people in the world that care about them, and it may not feel that way in the moment. And as educators, we might be the only person that sees them and hears them and is there for them. So just keep that in mind. Oh, we appreciate that. Yes, there will be a recording of this, and we are at our 6:30 mark. So thank you all for being here. We so appreciate you. And Juletta and MJ, you're some of my favorite humans. So thank you for being here with us in conversation today.
Thank you for having us. We appreciate being a part of this for sure.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And thank you everybody for taking the time to join us today.